So, with the recent release of the Star Wars Battlefront Classic Collection and its not so great response so far, it got me thinking about what other times a game came out that a ton of people were looking forward to that just wasn't up to snuff. Now, to start with the Battlefront Collection, while I haven't seen a ton of reviews at the time of writing, I did see that the game launched with 3 servers. I would like to ask who in their right mind would make an online game and only have 3 servers. I can only really see this being understandable for a brand new game from an indie studio, and even then, I doubt they would limit it to 64 players per server. For the record, 10,000 players tried playing at launch. Star Wars isn't a niche franchise either. The series has been a part of the pop culture zeitgeist since the first film was a surprise hit in '77, with games being made for the series since 1982. This isn't not doing your homework. This is for getting you signed up for the class and showing up for the final exam thinking that you can make it through with simple knowledge of the subject. Speaking of recent re-releases people were disappointed in, the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection. This one I don't really understand all the hate for. Now, the version for the Switch locks the frame rate of Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 to 30 frames per second as opposed to the 60 that the games were originally made for, even though these are PlayStation 2 era games. Yeah, that's bad. The versions of these games were from the HD collection from the 360 PS3, but even then, it's strange that versions that are a decade old would run at a lower frame rate than the original release. Now, the Master Collection release wasn't just on Nintendo's system. Luckily, it was also released for PlayStation 4 and 5, Xbox, and even PC. I personally have the PlayStation 5 version. From what I've seen, the PC version might be the best choice with mods and whatnot. Now, one of the biggest problems people had with this re-release of the games, from what I saw, boiled down to people expecting a full-on remaster of the game with 4K visuals and new textures and such. I don't think Konami ever once said that these were supposed to be remastered. If they did, then that's on me. Granted, they still technically are remasters, just not as grand as people probably expected. I don't think this collection was bad. Again, I got it for my own personal Metal Gear collection, and I enjoy it. The games weren't broken. Outside of the Switch release, which, to be fair, I haven't tried, the games run well. I just think that what fans thought they were getting made people upset at the release. Granted, there were other problems, such as bugs and glitches that weren't present in the original releases, and the fact that there were no cloud saves of the game on PC at launch. Going back to the Switch version, I think the physical copies only had Metal Gear Solid 1 on the cart. Now, that is just a bigger problem with Switch versions of collections like this. I mean, Capcom did similar shit with the Mega Man and Resident Evil releases on Switch. At least with RE games, they can be pretty big for the Switch. I think the maximum size for carts on the Switch goes up to 64 gigabytes, so in some cases it makes sense for the Switch releases to be split and have maybe one game on cards. However, when you decide to do this with the smaller game and make the larger game the download, then you have a problem. The Resident Evil Revelations collection on Switch only has Revelations 1 on the cart. That might be a big deal, but Revelations 2 is 24 gigabytes. Yeah, the Switch's onboard storage is 32 gigs. So, unless you have an SD card, most of the system's space will be filled with Resident Evil. Now, I can go on for a while on that front alone, but I'm starting to get off topic. Getting back to disappointing game releases, let's talk about Daikatana. Now, everyone who knows of Daikatana knows of the infamous advertisement. And while the game isn't great, I feel like people know more about that ad than the actual game. Now, for the people who don't know who John Romero is, well, he was kind of the video game equivalent of a rock star. The man was a big deal. Starting out at id Software, he helped make classics like Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, and Quake. He left id in 1995 to make his own studio and games, and the first game that his new studio would announce was Daikatana. People were hyped. But when the game came out, it was a bit of a mess. It felt outdated, it was buggy, and the AI companions just did not work in the way that they should have, leading to unintended deaths and game overs. Side note, the Nintendo 64 version of the game ended up not having these companions. Not that it helped, as the Nintendo 64 is considered the worst of the three. Somehow the best version of the game is the Zelda clone on Game Boy Color, which didn't even officially come out in America. Now, Daikatana was announced in '97 and released in the year 2000. That development time may not sound too bad now, but in the '90s, that was a big deal. The game had been delayed multiple times, and at one point, they even changed game engines, which, from what I've noticed when looking into game development, usually isn't a great sign. That's not to say it's a death sentence for a game, but usually having to take extra time to remake models in a new engine because the ones that are already finished are incompatible isn't a good sign. Now, I have played Daikatana for myself, and I have to say, it's fine. Granted, I recommend if you do play it, use the fan-made 1.3 patch. It greatly improves the experience by adding widescreen support, fixing the AI, and makes the companions much more tolerable. I think it was summed up best by this quote from Jeff Lundgren of Next Generation magazine. This isn't the worst game you'll ever play, but there's precious little fun either. 2 years out of its time, Daikatana is notable mostly for its mediocrity. Speaking of outdated, mediocre, and shifting game engines, Duke Nukem Forever. There's a ton I can say about this one, but I feel so many other people have bashed this game to hell and back. But I should at least talk about it. Duke Nukem Forever was the poster child of development hell in gaming. Some people believed that it would never come out. In fact, I think my first exposure to Duke as a character was hearing people mention that the game was taking a long time. And again, I have tried the game for myself. There's something about it that I do find enjoyable, but it just doesn't feel like Duke Nukem. Duke's one-liners in this one just don't hit like they did in Duke Nukem 3D. The gunplay is fine, but the weapons don't pack a punch to me. It just feels off. I feel like the problem was George Broussard, the man in charge of development, kept wanting to innovate. But at some point, they should have just said fuck it and finished what they had. A few years ago, an earlier version from 2001 did leak, and I tried that version before I even tried the actual released version. And comparing the two, strangely, the unfinished E3 build felt much more polished. That's not to say it's perfect. Most of the levels are unfinished, and in fact, you can't even complete some of them. There is a restoration project working on fixing up that E3 build, so I'd say keep your eye on that. Hopefully, it'll be done and we'll see what Duke Nukem could have been had the game released in, I want to say 2003, 2004, if they stuck with that build. The problem with that E3 build was George Broussard kept seeing newer games and wanted to incorporate what he saw in them. Games like Half-Life 2 and Doom 3 and Halo. But again, he should have stopped and just finished what they had, even if it did look inferior to other games. Hell, the build engine that was used to make Duke Nukem 3D looked graphically inferior to other games being released at the time. But that didn't stop Duke from standing on its own against games like Quake and Doom. One positive about DNF is fans have been working on finishing up the 2001 build, like I said. And even then, there are mods for Duke Nukem Forever that fixes many problems that people had with it, like removing the gun limit and fixing up technical issues. Now, if you want to talk disappointing games, I feel as if you are in some way contractually obligated to talk about either Fable or No Man's Sky. I guess I'll start with No Man's Sky, seeing as it is the most recent. And I'll start with saying, at least No Man's Sky eventually became the game that was promised, with updates and patches, and now is genuinely a fun space exploration game. Now, what was promised? Multiplayer was promised, but wasn't there at launch. Hell, you and a friend could travel to the exact same planet and be standing in the exact same place and never see each other. You weren't able to name your ship, which, I'm gonna be honest, is not something that I would have had problems with, but I understand people being upset about. You weren't able to join space battles and a handful of other things that were promised. I'm gonna be honest, it's not easy for me to fully explain, but there is a convenient spreadsheet that does go over what was promised and even shows what eventually got implemented, including features that weren't promised. Now, before No Man's Sky, there was Peter Molyneux, and Peter Molyneux was the master of overpromise. Now, I will at least give credit to the man. He's made some good games before Fable. He worked on games like Populous, Dungeon Keeper, Black and White, and after Fable made one of my personal favorite sim games, The Movies. He's had a reputation of making good games, but that reputation also came with the downside of overpromising for a lot of these games. People started getting disappointed when he would say one thing and the game comes out only to reveal that what he promised didn't happen. One of the biggest things that he said would be in the first game was you could plant an acorn at the beginning and see it grow as the game goes on. Now, I don't know if it was how he described it or what people believed, but it comes off like people expected a tree growing in real time. But if that was the case, that wouldn't have been possible on the original Xbox or PCs at the time. Hell, I'm convinced unless you have special hardware, that's still not possible. Some of the other things he said you could do was stuff like carving your initials into a tree only to see them 10 years later. He said that NPCs could steal your quest and complete them before you do, and you could even watch your character slowly age from a child to an adult. Hell, one of the biggest things he said was you can have children that would take over as the player character if you died, none of which were implemented. Though the character slowly aging technically did happen, just amongst chapters. It's kinda complicated. I think the biggest quote unquote lie he made was for the Xbox Connect game he was developing, which was called Project Milo. Later, Milo and Kate. That project was said to be an advanced artificial intelligence similar to what you would see in a science fiction movie. The problem was, every time we saw the game, it was heavily scripted. Had it not been cancelled, it would have looked very similar to games like Hey You Pikachu and Seaman, looking for you to say the right thing and make the right gesture to progress. That's not to say that the game would have been bad had it come out, but I feel people's expectations would have really hurt the game. Now, there are many more games that I could talk about, but for now I think I'll leave it there. I suppose I could have talked about more games like Cyberpunk 2077 or Fallout 76, but maybe I can do that if I were to return the topic. Maybe leave some games you were disappointed in the comments and I'll add them next time. Until then, I guess I'll see you. Don't really have a good way to end these. I guess there's nothing left for me to say except I'll see you guys next time.